One of the things I was curious is like you went from political science to security. What made you decide to make that jump? Did you go in thinking you want to go into like politics and eventually came into security, or what came first and how did you even start that journey?
So I used to be a bit of an idealist, so I wanted to work for an NGO or maybe the United Nations or at least government. And working in tech always seemed extremely boring to me, and it was like the lowest on my list of interests. But after my graduation, it was super hard to find a job. So it was actually out of desperation that I accepted a job at a tech company in an IT role. More or less like, okay, I can do this for 1 or 2 years, just make some money, and then I will try again to get a job at an NGO. But yeah, once I was in, I was hooked, and I really like working in IT, and I've never disliked it once I got started. So that's how I transitioned.
That's great. And from what I'm seeing here, you, as I mentioned before, you previously came from Capgemini as a security consultant. Did you come in as a security consultant or a consultant that eventually get into security?
At Capgemini, I really started as security consultant. Before I worked at Capgemini, I already had around 6 years of experience working in smaller IT companies and always in the security department. So that's where I already built up some experience. So when I joined Capgemini, I was focused on security and also privacy, which is frequently combined, uh, especially in Europe.
One of the things I was kind of curious about, just bringing back to Capgemini, how would you say your consulting experience in security is different than being in the industry? I know like now it's a little bit different. You're on management, you're a CISO, but did you feel like that was the next move? What made you decide to go into industry?
Um, Well, before I worked at Capgemini, I also worked in industry, and I was always working for smaller companies, so around 100 people. And the upside of that is that you can be very involved and very part of the team, and you're having a large impact. But at some point, I thought I wanted to see what consulting would be like. So that was more of a test to see if I would like it better to work in a large organization and to work as an external consultant, doing projects more than being really responsible for a certain department. But after a year, I kind of realized that I prefer to be in industry because I think I can make more impact from an internal role.
Do you think it's because when you're in consulting, you're for a short-term project and then you don't really see it through, but if you're in the industry, you get to really see it through and see you have like a bigger lens essentially.
Yes, I think if you're a consultant, they're obviously paying you to do a very specific project or a specific task, and you should also focus on that. If you're an internal role, you can look a little bit broader, and you can, or at least I feel I can be more involved and more committed to the overall goals of the company, and not just my own contribution to it.
And when you were in Capgemini, were you also working on like email security or was it a broad spectrum of security issues?
Gemini, my biggest assignment was with a government agency, and they asked me if I could make sure they were compliant to the GDPR that has just been introduced back then in Europe.
Yeah.
And they knew that involved a lot of things, but they did not really know what in that specific agency. So that was my very specific assignment.
Okay. It's amazing. I know a lot of people that are interested in joining into security, and the first thing they always go is like, oh, what should I learn? What trainings are out there? What certifications should I get? For those that want to break into security or cybersecurity, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think it's fair enough. It's really quite hard if you are completely fresh and you don't have any experience in the field. There are not a lot of entry jobs, at least not here in the Netherlands. There are not a lot of entry jobs for security professionals. So what you could try is maybe already work in IT department or in a legal department or in a privacy team and find your way to security. And also it makes sense to figure out what type of role you would like within cybersecurity, because there is, like I said, governance work is quite different than being a red teamer that is doing ethical hacking. And you probably can't do it all. And especially before starting your first job, you won't be able to develop all those skills.
Interesting. So you mentioned types and parts of security. What part does Zyber play? Is it Zever or Zyber, by the way?
Ziver.
Ziver. Okay, I was wrong both ways. What part in security does Ziver go in?
So we are focused on what we call outbound email security. And so it's about the emails that you send. And we're adding extra layers of protection on those emails, having extra encryption, extra authentication. So it's harder for unauthorized people, or almost impossible, I should say, to access those messages. But we're also acknowledging that with outgoing email, a lot of data leaks happen because people make a mistake. They send it to the wrong person, or they attach the wrong attachment, or things like that. And Ziver is actually able to detect these mistakes and give warnings to the user before they press send, so they can adjust accordingly.
Interesting. Is this like a extension of, like, let's say Gmail or Outlook or an existing email app?
Yeah, so we have our base is a web application, but we also offer a plugin on Outlook and on the Chrome, Google or Gmail. And also on Outlook on web, and that makes it quite easy, because then the user doesn't have to go to another product when they think, I want to send a secure email, I need to go to Ziver. No, Ziver is right there, and they can just enable it with one click.
What does it exactly look for? Does it give you a reminder of like, hey, this is, I've seen this actually in when I work, that like, hey, this is from an external organization, or this looks like a phishing email. Is that like similar to what that would be?
It's similar, but that's all focused on incoming email. So you've
Oh,
received
okay.
an email, yeah, and we are focused on outgoing email. So when you are typing an email, it may detect that there are social security numbers in the attachment, and that you may not want to send that externally. Or it can detect there's medical information in there, and that your organization recommends enabling extra security if you're sending medical information, because of course that's super sensitive. It can also detect that you're sending an email to maybe a Christine that you haven't emailed to before. So are you sure you're adding the right recipient? These types of things it's detecting. It's usually really human errors that people are frequently making when sending emails.
That's very useful. I feel like I've seen a lot of people accidentally send very sensitive information, and there's a lot of training out there, but at the same time, it's as good as whatever you're actually caring about. And if you're careless, then
Yeah.
that's where it would be.
Exactly, and a lot of people are making these mistakes. I think everybody has probably sent the email to the wrong person at least once in their life, and especially if you're having a busy and a hectic day, you're more likely to make a mistake like that. And yeah, it's just always makes you feel so bad when you have done that.
So what kind of clients do you work with? This sounds like financial institutions, healthcare, maybe even government would be like the perfect demographic for this.
Yeah, it's a lot of public sector. So we started in healthcare, hospitals, with elderly homes. It's a huge sector once you dive into it. But we're also very successful in, for example, municipalities that also have to email very sensitive information about their citizens. The legal sector, they obviously have very sensitive information to send to the courts or to other lawyers. And also in the financial sector, those are our biggest sectors, because they have a lot of emails to send and a lot of sensitive personal data that they need to take care of.
Speaking of nightmares, can you tell me what is the concept of security fatigue? I've never heard of this before, but I heard that I should definitely be asking this question to you.
Yes, so thanks. I recently started researching this topic a bit more. It's not super famous yet, but more and more research has been done on this topic. And security fatigue is basically it's an emotional state of employees that feel overwhelmed by security, because it's getting more and more attention. Maybe there are more and more policies and rules and risks to look out for, and they frequently have to attend awareness training, and it's all becoming a lot. and they feel tired, frustrated, sometimes a bit hopeless, like there's so much to consider, I can't do this right. And then the behavior that is sort of followed by these emotions is that they are not compliant to the security policy. But this group is not a group that intentionally is not compliant. They're not caring, but they are just not able to comply all the time. And that's a scary scenario because we're talking about employees that in general are supportive of security. They understand it's important. They agree with the policy. And they want to do the right thing, but they're still not always doing it. And that's an interesting group because how will you address them? How will you mitigate that risk? And it's a real risk. Last year, Harvard Business Review did their research and found that 1 in 20 jobs, people are not following the security rules. And that may not seem like a lot, but if that policy is very important for you, then 1 out of 20 jobs is still quite a lot. So yeah, it's really interesting for me to see how can you tackle that phenomenon. If you can't just get them to believe your story, something else needs to happen.
Yeah, and I can actually definitely see that with, like, let's say the older generation. A lot of the younger generation, we grew in the age of technology, so some of that is going to come second nature. Like, for example, having a long passwords. Meanwhile, I know like maybe some grandma out there is going to have password as their password, and they're like, security matters, but then I don't know how to do it, or they just feel like, why is there so many things that are changing? There's too many things that I have to keep worried of, and why can't I just live my life kind of thing? But I can definitely see that as being a especially like as you grow older, you're like, oh, more of this.
Yeah, definitely. And I also, people that work in tech sometimes forget that there are also a lot of people that don't work in tech.
Yeah.
And their primary job is maybe to teach at a school or to be a nurse. And they have a very different focus. And for them, a lot of security stuff is they understand it's important, but it's still annoying.
Mm.
And therefore they are also more likely to get this feeling of frustration because they don't fully understand the risk. Sometimes they can't fully remember what they were supposed to do, and then they're like, I don't remember this, I need to look it up, or maybe I'll just ignore this email for now because I don't know if it's phishing or not. And what you see is obviously smaller levels of security, but sometimes it's also smaller levels of productivity because people start to avoid tasks like opening an email or logging a password. And therefore it's really impacting work as well.
So since this is a Women of Inspiration podcast, I did want to know that, like, how did you feel as a woman in security? I feel like in other parts of technology, there's a little, this is just my sense. I don't know, maybe it's different in Amsterdam, but there's just not as many women in security. How did you feel about that? Do you feel like that's the case? And how was it navigating in security as a woman?
I think it's definitely changing. So if you're looking at older generations, like above 50, I'd say the people in security are almost all men. But I think our generation and younger, there are definitely a lot of women working in security. They are more focused on the governance and the compliance side and maybe on the harder tech things like ethical hacking or blue teaming, but it's changing. Usually, I think it was fine working as a woman in security. There have been weird situations where I was asked to join a customer call because they were asking for an escalation call. And the guy on the other side thought that I did not understand anything about security and started to explain a lot of things to me, which was obviously not great, but it did lower the whole escalation situation because he was I guess he was feeling some empathy for me because I was just someone who didn't understand the job. But in general, it's been quite all right, and not I haven't really noticed much about being a woman in this particular field. Only that I'm usually the only woman in the room.